Ghosts appear in many forms. We can see them.
What was that?
We can hear them.
I am not afraid.
And sometimes we can even feel them. We've gone around the globe in search of the most terrifying spirits and supernatural beings who continue to live on long after their deaths. On World's Scariest Hauntings, anything can happen. Because you never know who's watching when the lights go out.
What the hell was that?
In this episode, a trendy neighbourhood built on top of a mass burial site.
As soon as you unearth bones, you're gonna have some kind of backlash from that.
Memories of a troubled past hang in the air. They're so vivid, you can almost touch them.
I was kind of in a state of disbelief. I kind of felt shivers crawling up my spine, and I felt pretty uneasy.
The streets of Griffintown in downtown Montreal are haunted by a bevy of terrifying spirits.
The ghost of Mary Gallagher is said to return here every 7 years to look for her head. Where is it? Where is that bucket? Where is that head?
Cosmopolitan Montreal in Quebec, Canada, is an unlikely setting for a series of ghost stories. But hiding away in the modern world is a small neighbourhood with memories of a traumatic past. Griffintown may look like a burgeoning metropolis, but the swanky apartment blocks and restaurants can only paper over the cracks of a torrid history where famine, disease, and murder were regular occurrences. Anton Golikov runs paranormal tours of the haunted area, known affectionately by the locals as the Griff.
There's ghosts everywhere. I think it's a ghost town, right? All the people that got evicted, everybody that just had to leave, you know, a lot of them died. A lot of them passed away here because they had nowhere to go. They didn't have any money. They couldn't move to the other side of the canal. This whole neighborhood was ravaged. So there's a lot of old souls that still permeate this area.
It's not uncommon to hear of an entire area that is considered to be haunted, and in the case of Griffintown, it would sort of fit that blueprint very well because there's so much troubled history to the location. So it makes a lot of sense that people might feel that there's something sort of haunted to the area.
People often report maybe somebody watching them from behind a curtain or looking in through the new windows from outside the street, or sounds coming from the pipes. Just something is there.
In recent years, gentrification has turned the once industrial location into one of Montreal's wealthiest neighbourhoods. But many believe that the seemingly endless construction work has woken the dead.
Griffintown is undergoing lots of redevelopment at the moment. It's becoming a new metropolis. There are bones being dug up, and there are spirits that are seemingly now restless as a result of all this redevelopment and building works.
Any kind of change to the spirit's natural place or habitat or their home affects them very much as it affects us. So all the spirits that, you know, aren't laid to rest, or the spirits that have passed down there, the spirits that it was their home, they definitely think it would affect the supernaturalness that happens on the land.
A lot of the residents also around these parts, they feel like there's a presence, you know, particularly in the basements and the foundations of the buildings. So, you know, you build a new foundation like there, you know, you dig a hole, but sometimes you find bodies, bones, all kinds of surprises.
One of the spirits who remains very much alive in the local psyche is Mary Gallagher, a local prostitute who lived in an apartment on the corner of William and Murray Streets in Griffintown.
The house has been demolished for a while, but the story remains. You'd often see people sitting in lawn chairs on the evening of the anniversary of the death of Mary Gallagher. And oftentimes what they will see is a headless corpse walking around, kind of ambling, probably looking for its head.
Some spirits like to show themselves on dates of significance, such as anniversaries, birthdays, or even the date they died. It's fairly common, and there are examples of like grey ladies, red ladies, and those kinds of apparitions, historical apparitions, seen at notably haunted locations on exactly the same date every few years.
Mary's story dates back to June the 27th, 1879.
Mary Gallagher and her friend Susan Kennedy went out for a bar hop, and they went all the way down to the Old Port, which is a bit of a walk away from here. And they came across this one man named Michael Flanagan, very robust, drunk Irish man, sitting in a bar by himself, drinking whiskey. Perfect client, perfect person to bring over with them. And they started working their charms on him.
The trio headed back to 242 William Street.
Now, the story has many different angles. The best witness, the most reliable witness, was a woman that lived downstairs. She was a housewife, and that morning she heard, first of all, a scream, followed by just this whacking sound, this continuous kind of whacking into a wooden floor right above her dinner table. And she looked up and she saw a little hole start to form in the wood. And a little bit of blood started dripping down through this new hole in her ceiling.
Later that day, the police found the lifeless body of Mary Gallagher.
The strangest sight that they saw actually was near the bed. There was a bucket, and in the bucket was her head. So it was a headless corpse bleeding all over the floor. There was axe marks on the wall, axe marks on the floor, so the body had been chopped. And actually that's what caused this hole to form in the lady's ceiling.
Despite a lack of evidence, it was Susan Kennedy who was imprisoned for the rest of her life for the murder of Mary Gallagher.
The one thing to keep in mind here is that Susie was a little bit jealous of Mary Gallagher. They had this very keen professional relationship, but on the personal level, there was a little bit of jealousy between the two of them. Everybody kind of claimed innocence in this case, but the police pinned the murder on Susie Kennedy because of these stories of jealousy, because of these other clients that had witnessed these two women fighting.
Despite being brutally murdered over 130 years ago, Mary Gallagher still visits her now unrecognizable home.
We often hear in ghost stories in general this sort of notion of an angry spirit or a spirit that holds a grudge, and perhaps they'd been murdered or there'd been an event that they felt they'd been wronged, and until the spirit can avenge it, then it's not able to ascend to wherever it's going to go next.
The ghost of Mary Gallagher is said to return here every 7 years to look for her head that is no longer on the second floor. Where is it? Where is that bucket? Where is that head?
Before Griffintown existed, the land was a portage route for Native Americans. After the British arrived in 1760, the area eventually fell into the hands of an Anglo-Irishman named Thomas McCord.
While Thomas McCord was on a business trip back to England, he had a very unscrupulous partner that sold his own land to a certain Mary Griffin, where the name Griffintown comes from.
The underhand founding of Griffintown in 1799 is very much in keeping with its history ever since.
Griffintown is kind of a portrait of Montreal. A lot of demographics, a lot of different peoples came through here. In the 1840s, there was a big influx of Irish immigrants and became a shantytown, basically. One of the biggest shantytowns in North America.
The neighbourhood never recovered and remained an impoverished area of Montreal.
This place was eventually rezoned by the mayor of Montreal in the 60s, and because of that, we saw one of the mass deportations of people from a neighborhood, and from what was a large population of 85,000 people, went right down to about 2,000, 1,000 people. A lot of the unwanted things were brought here to Griffintown and dumped into this canal.
With such a checkered history, it's no surprise that the ghosts of the past have been awoken.
I think that this place, like I said, has seen a lot of tragedy. It's seen a lot of death from disease, from crime, just a lot of suffering. A lot of people's suffering still remains here. The energy is still very heavy. You could walk down the street and feel like something is following you. And that's probably the past that's following you.
A past full of anguish that refuses to be forgotten. In downtown Montreal, you'll find one of Canada's most haunted regions. Founded in 1799, Griffintown sits uncomfortably in the modern world, a neighbourhood with a dark past. The Lachine Canal is the lifeblood of the district known as the Griff.
In the 1850s, this whole place expanded. The canal actually grew for bigger shipping, bigger boats that would pass through here. You see this swing bridge, which is behind me over here, and it connected Point St. Charles, which is on the other side, to the Griffintown, which is here.
The Wellington swing bridge is no stranger to tragedy and supernatural sightings.
On the bridge, it's been reported that there's a ghost of a little boy that is walking along the bridge to the very, very edge of it, right on the left over there. He's wearing a suit. He's well dressed. He's looks like he's returning from church or something like that. And he seems to be in a rush. He seems like he's going somewhere in a rush. And he starts to run at one point at the end of the bridge, and then he jumps and just disappears, so we don't see him anymore. Don't know if he's fallen or something. It looks like he's just gone.
Reports from September 1908 tell of the 13-year-old boy's horrific death.
So the operator in this building over here pulled the lever, the bridge went to its position right like that, and the boy was waiting in the middle of the bridge for all the shipping to pass. And then as the bridge started to turn, he started to run, and he wanted to jump onto the embankment over here, and unfortunately he fell, and he got crushed as the bridge came into place. They called the local doctor here. People took a look at this kid. He was dead. His name was Arthur Carr, and they put out a notice, Arthur Carr dead at the Wellington swing bridge. And nobody claimed his body. His parents never came. There was no family that came to claim him. The theory is that his spirit still remains here, untouched, and still tries to cross this bridge every now and then.
The boy that's seen frequently running across the bridge in a sort of reenactment of what happened the day he died. So that would be considered a residual ghost. It's sort of the notion of something being played out over and over again. I think you could say that would be linked to the weight of the tragedy of the event, which is, it was a young boy that was killed in quite terrible, gruesome circumstances, and B, that apparently his parents weren't around, or no one ever claimed the body. So I think that a story like that is retained in the public consciousness for a very long time, and that would contribute to this idea of it apparently sort of being seen quite often.
Makes a lot of sense to me, because he's waiting for somebody to probably come get him and show him the way home. Can you imagine being a little kid and losing you know, your place or where you were, or not knowing where your parents are and being stuck in almost your own cosmic loop of trying to figure and find out and being scared. And so that's definitely why he's still there, and that's just so sad. He needs a spirit rescue.
Anton has experienced the ghost of Arthur Carr firsthand while taking a paranormal tour around the canal.
We were standing around here and I was telling the story about the boy getting crushed right over here. And as everybody peered over the side, a big splash came in the water. Didn't make any sense. It was like an upward splash. It wasn't like something fell in, but like something was trying to come out. We all witnessed this. Nobody threw a rock or anything. There's no reason for that to happen. We all just kind of acknowledged the fact that maybe the spirit still does live around these parts.
Obviously, a tragedy has happened on that bridge. That poor boy lost his life, so he will still be trying to make that jump now. As a spirit child, he'd still be trying to make that jump, so people will be able to see him.
People often say, what is a ghost doing, or what is their purpose? Are they trying to remind us of the past? Are they trying to hold on to some kind of piece of the past? I'm not sure. I think that the spirits relive certain traumatic events that might have happened to them. And they relive them over and over and over again because there's a certain kind of, disbelief. There's a certain kind of agony in the way that they died. And that's something that remains here. If you stand around here, you could really feel that kind of vibration, you know?
Not all the ghosts of Griffintown are believed to be human. Some lurk in the dark, terrifying the local residents. Catherine Ridyard has lived in and around the neighbourhood for 25 years. She vividly recalls her supernatural encounter on the streets of the Griff.
It was late summer. It was about 2:20 in the morning, and I was coming home from that direction over there. And I stood on the corner where the light is, and I looked this way, and I saw what appeared to be, it looked like to me like somebody was squatting on the sidewalk. It was somebody squatting. That's what I thought. I realized that, no, that's not a person, because it was just too tall to be squatting on the sidewalk. And then all of a sudden I got this feeling, and it looked up at me, and it noticed me noticing it, and it looked at me and had red eyes. And the first thing that went into my gut feeling was, it's hungry.
The unworldly being that scared Catherine so much is believed to be a shadow person.
Shadow people is a name given to a spirit that looks or resembles a dark shadow. It's normally faceless and they move within the shadows. Some are seen as being darker than the dark of the actual area they're seen in.
Some say time travelers, some say nasty negative spirits, some just say it's a manifestation of spirit. Some say it's your own shadow. So it could be a vast array of different things.
I mean, I could tell the outline of it looked like somebody was like a big frog, almost like in appearance, sort of. But it was a black shadow, and it had like a head, but it had also red eyes, and it scared me.
With some trepidation, Catherine has returned to the location of her terrifying experience.
It was here, and I came back the next day, and I looked at the ground, and it looked like there was some kind of black goo on the ground. Now, you've got to remember, this is 8 years ago. And then this pole has been this way ever since. I still get a bad feeling just standing here. You know, I don't like it. I don't walk on the side of the street at night, or in the daytime for that matter.
Catherine has since begun to study the strange beings.
I heard something about shadow people and red glowing eyes and that kind of thing. And I looked it up on the internet, and I saw the exact same shadow, the same squat posture, the same head and black, exactly the same with the red glowing eyes. Now, I researched this particular kind of shadow person, and it's a very bad one to have around or to even be anywhere in your vicinity. And it's supposed to be really demonic, not nice at all. nor any other shadow people in my opinion there, but this is like the worst one to have.
Shadow people are not what I would class as a human being. They would be a manifestation of a presence. Now, this could be negative or it could be positive energy. Sometimes from past experience, shadow people have been known to be negative people. So the fears of the feelings of being watched and fear and panic and things like that are usually associated with shadow people.
Catherine has continued to be haunted by the dark shadows.
I started getting sick and things started happening, like bad luck stuff. I was hearing knocking noises in my room. I refused to sleep in my bedroom anymore after that. I would stay at the kitchen table, and that was freaky too. I took a picture in a mirror and this thing was beside me in the mirror and it wasn't there when I was in the bathroom taking the picture.
In all walks of life, we can sit there and say 7 years bad luck comes from smashing a mirror. You know, how many times is that actually true? Whereas if you come into contact with a shadow person, there could be a negative presence associated with that she would have sat and probably thought to herself that I've seen this and this could be associated with it.
Catherine is on the road to recovery, but she'll never forget the night she came face to face with evil.
If I hadn't noticed it as quickly as I did, it had noticed me before I noticed it. I think I may very well have disappeared, you know, like, because I think in that alley there's something, there's a doorway or something, and like this pole here is still here, and it's still like looks like it's eaten away, and I think it comes out once in a while, and it might just grab somebody. Just standing here gives me goosebumps. My health has improved 100%. I'm happy about that. But I'm also, you know, I'm very wary of things. I believe that things go bump in the night, and that's the way it is.
And in Griffintown, there are many other spirits that go bump in the night. Griffintown's Lachine Canal officially opened in 1825, turning Montreal into one of the world's major ports. This channel of water has become one of the Griff's most paranormally active areas.
Certain areas of Griffintown are said to be more haunted than others. There's a particular area by the canal that has seemed to attract more spirit phenomena than others, and that might well be due to tragic circumstances.
We are on the extremity of the canal. We're actually right next to the Peel Basin. On the other side of the canal over here, there's a lot of ghost sightings that happen. A lot of people take photos around these parts. A lot of tourists come by here, and people notice on their photos after they've taken them that there's orbs, there's little white dots that are floating around in the photos. It's a very strange phenomenon, you know? It's kind of indicative of spirits that might be still living around these parts.
During the Irish potato famine between 1845 and 1849, many people fled Ireland and headed to North America. Loaded onto cargo ships, they arrived malnourished and carrying diseases like typhus. Many were quarantined in sheds alongside the canal in Griffintown.
They were coming to the old port of Montreal, getting off the ships and just dropping like flies. So these fever shacks that they built here in 1847 housed all of these very sick and dying refugees. At the time, in 1847, Montreal was a very small city. It was a population of about 50,000. All of a sudden have to accommodate 75,000 new people. The citizens of Montreal were not happy about the fact that there was this vast sea of Irish that were contagious and bringing this disease into town with them.
Drastic action was taken by the authorities.
The army was called. They were put on all the rail bridges, on all of the bridges that would cross into town. It was almost kind of like a zombie apocalypse type thing. You know, they put this fence alongside. All these people that were sick on the other side couldn't cross over. And if they would be shot or they would be thrown into the canal over here.
That's the kind of thing that people don't sort of forget very easily, and there's something very haunting about that, of course, so it makes sense that we associate an area like that with ghosts and sightings and hauntings and that sort of thing.
One of the ghosts who has been spotted near the canal is a former mayor of Montreal.
In 1847, there was a certain John Easton Mills. He was actually American, but he was the mayor of Montreal, elected. He was a very generous man. He was aiding the sick. In a way, he himself took it as his responsibility to help the people that were dying on the other side of the river.
Inevitably, John Easton Mills succumbed to typhus.
The mayor himself, at the age of 54, contracted this disease. It was his last act, was to bring food and water to the poor there, and he passed away. So in a way, this apparition that we see over there is probably still doing his duties to these people.
He was trying to show compassion and humility to these people, and I think the land very much imprinted him doing that. So that's probably why he's still seen to this day doing the same thing, to show that these people weren't, animals, they're humans and they feel, and the mayor saw that.
Obviously, he did have that caring nature about him in order to look after those people who were quite ill. And it is not uncommon for people to actually come back and still care for people that they think is still there.
The typhus epidemic of 1847 claimed the lives of 6,000 people. The victims of this tragic event are buried just below the cycle path that runs alongside the Lachine Canal today.
There was so much death that they had to build trenches to get rid of the dead. They had to build these huge, huge trenches. They dug these trenches and they would just throw hundreds of bodies at a time and bury them on this site here. Right now it's a bike path, so a lot of people that are biking there, they feel this negative energy. They don't know what it's coming from, but it still remains. And a lot of the excavations that are happening in Griffintown, a lot of the new buildings that are popping up, once the foundations are being dug, once the buildings are starting to be built, they discover remnants of the bodies right underground there.
One man who is more than aware of the paranormal energy that crackles in the air of the Griff is Louis Lemontagne.
This area is in the process of being gentrified. There's many condos popping up, so a lot of the history is being forgotten, but there's a lot of kind of dark and really interesting history around this neighbourhood, Griffintown.
Louis remembers exploring the area when he moved to Griffintown.
My first time here, I was with a couple of friends, and it was mid-January, pretty cold day, and we were going for a walk. We came upon this bridge, and suddenly we just stopped for about 20 minutes, and I was staring off for what seemed like at least half an hour. After a while, I felt like I was in a bit of a trance-like state. I saw kind of a orb glimmering amidst the grass. It was kind of a translucent orb, letting out kind of a diffuse, milky light, kind of something dancing about that felt superimposed on my vision, almost like holographic. I wasn't sure that if I went up to it, I'd be able to touch it, but I could definitely feel it was tangible.
Orbs are thought to be essentially disembodied spirits of, the people who have died and sort of unable to leave or pass on to wherever a spirit would go after death. So they're frequently described as being like sort of balls of electricity floating through the air.
It really captured my attention, and I just stared at it for a while. And as soon as I considered walking over to see if it was a trick of the light or what was going on, my friend nudged me and told me to go home.
Louis knew he had to come back and explore some more.
It was actually a couple of weeks later. I was walking by myself this time at night, around midnight or so, and I could see this conglomeration of white orbs kind of dancing above the mounds. So whereas last time I only saw one, this time it looked like there could have been thousands. But I could hear kind of in the background these voices in my head, so I thought I was having like an auditory hallucination or something like that. All of a sudden, I just kind of closed my eyes to focus in on what I was hearing, and it sounded like the wailing of voices. At first, I thought it sounded maybe like a choir or something like that, but I realized there was an element of pain in the voices as well. I kind of collapsed, like slumped over on the mound, and when I came back to my senses, I could see ships, kind of ghost ships, just floating above me, I guess, paired with the sound of these voices coming again.
Spirit shows you things when they're trying to communicate with you and tell you certain things. So whatever they show you from that point on, whether it's in your mind's eye or physically in front of you, I really believe it has to do with the spirits that are there and the story that they're trying to tell the person that they're communicating with.
The sheer size of the paranormal event stunned Louis.
I was kind of in a state of disbelief. I didn't really trust my senses. I was pretty curious as well, but also pretty frightened. I kind of felt shivers crawling up my spine, and I felt pretty uneasy.
If a person's quite open and quite sensitive, to go into a trance-like state, which would enable his subconscious to actually communicate with the orbs and obviously followed them as to what he was supposed to do, then it could be a possibility that they've actually led him to where they wanted him to be.
After a while, it just kind of dissipated, and I was just left there kind of bewildered, wondering what I was doing, and got back on the bridge and I walked home.
Before his mystical encounter, Louis was unaware of the history of the area.
At the time, I had no idea that this was a burial site, so I thought I was going a bit crazy, and I just kind of brushed it off. And it's only when I spoke to my friend a couple of weeks later that he told me that this was actually a mass burial site from the mid-19th century.
1847 was called Black 47 here in Montreal. All these dead and dying still buried on the other side of the canal. And the orbs are the vestige of that. They still float, these spirits that are forgotten and underground.
The renovation of Griffintown may explain why the paranormal activity is so rife.
Another sort of trope that we often hear coming out of stories about ghost sightings in Griffintown is this notion that somehow spirits have been disturbed because bodies have been dug up in the process of rebuilding the area. This is quite a commonly held notion in many cultures throughout the world, that the idea that if you disturb a body after it's been laid to rest, then it somehow creates a restlessness in the spirit, or indeed, if a body hasn't been properly laid to rest, the spirit will remain restless until that has been rectified.
Unearthing any human remains in general and disrupting the ritual and the laying to restness that has been done will definitely riff the spirit, because again, you're disrupting a holy ground, a holy place, whether ancient or modern. As soon as you unearth bones, you're disrupting that spirit who's laid to rest. You're gonna have some kind of backlash from that, whether it's karmic or cosmic.
Louis still can't quite believe what he experienced that night.
The only way I can justify it in my own mind is that, maybe in certain places where a lot of things happen, it can leave some sort of trace, let's say on electromagnetic level or something, I don't know. It really did feel like time was an illusion at that point, and the spirits of the people who suffered here and arrived here almost 200 years ago felt very much alive.
The paranormal energy generated beneath the banks of the Lachine Canal continues to show itself, even in the modern surroundings of 21st century Griffintown. Many of the ghosts of Griffintown are believed to be projections of its traumatic history, but one of the most iconic landmarks harbours spirits from a more recent past.
This is the land of beer. Montreal is the land of beer. You know, Griffintown, because of all the Irish, was a very popular drinking place. In 1861, there was a man by the name of William Dao. He was a very brilliant businessman. He kind of made this big conglomerate, 13 companies all together, and they opened this brewery, which is behind us over here. Eventually, this whole place just fell to ruin. The brewery was no longer used, the facilities were a little bit dated, so it got abandoned.
The brewery is believed to be one of Griffintown's paranormal hotspots.
There's a bunch of urban explorers that still go in there, take a look around, see what's in there. There's rumors abound that the Montreal Mafia uses this place as a sort of dumping ground for bodies. They say that there's a few bodies that are buried in concrete in the big silos that are back there on the other side. In the top floors, there's oftentimes paranormal explorers that go to see what's going on in this building. They say that there's a very intense, horrible ghostly activity up on the top floors. The ghost that's particular to this place kind of doesn't fall in line with the mafia stories or the brewing stories or anything like that. It's actually the ghost of a little girl.
Mediums who have investigated inside the Dao Brewery have dated the death of the girl to the late 1990s.
Oftentimes people report hearing the crying of this little girl coming from the ground, and when she hears people passing by, she stops crying and she starts calling for help. She starts asking people to pull her out of this hole in the ground.
I think obviously the atmosphere tends to absorb any sort of energy. Now, usually with tragedies, murders, anything like that, you would assume that the trauma and the traumatic experiences of those people have been absorbed by the atmosphere. So that would lend itself as to why the voices of people are heard and screams are heard, and obviously it just replays itself over and over again.
We have no idea where this girl comes from and how she ended up there. There are some theories. Maybe she was one of the daughters or something of a mafia boss or something like that. She got put into the ground. We're not sure. But she's definitely in there. She's crying for help. And if ever you go in there, you'll feel that energy up on the top floor.
With so many Irish immigrants entering Griffintown, St Anne's Catholic Church on the corner of Mountain and Basin Streets was once a bustling part of the town.
We're in the ruins of the St Anne's Church, which was built here in 1698 originally. This little chapel stood for about a century and then it burned down. The church was rebuilt in 1854. It was a lot bigger. All the Irish would come here. They could convene here for Mass. You could take a look just down the line. You see we're actually in the church right now. The benches that they have on the sides are where the pews used to be. The foundations, you see all the stone on the side there. And behind us in the forest, there used to be a priest's house. The priest used to live right back there.
During the 1960s, Griffintown was turned from a residential area into an industrial zone.
A lot of buildings got knocked down, demolished. Population of about 100,000 shrunk right down to about 2,000 people. Everybody got moved to the other side of the river over there. Everything became parking lots, industrial areas, big factories on either side of the canal. And there was nobody to come be the parish anymore, so they knocked it down as well. And these are the ruins that remain.
Although the building is gone, the energy has remained within the footprint of the church.
A lot of people are reporting that they're hearing certain things in the middle of the night. People usually hear footsteps following them in the middle of the street. Some people even hear bells, which are coming from this forest area, just like church bells that are going on in the middle of the night. There was a man who's actually, I believe he lived in one of these condos here. He was walking down the street going home, and he saw a priest having a funeral ceremony. And they all walked down this aisle to the entrance of the church. And as they reached the entrance, they all just disappeared. It's as though as they were exiting into the street, they were gone.
Now, there was no noise, there was no sound. But the person who witnessed this said that the mouths were open, they were singing, and there should have been noise. This is an example of a residual haunting, because the spirits seemingly moved through, oblivious to their surroundings, and then suddenly disappeared.
Somebody obviously passed away that was grave importance to the land or the people that are in the procession, and it made an imprint on the land, so it shows itself from time to time replaying as residual energy does.
Griffintown remains a mecca for ghost hunters from around the globe, fascinated with searching for old spirits within the new world.
I definitely believe that towns can be haunted, especially with the type of history that Griffintown has, with all of the Irish immigrants that fled the potato famine and came over on boats with horrible conditions, and they were sick, and then they died, and then they just threw them in mass graves in the canal. I mean, so the canal is just a mass grave that would definitely hold a lot and bring a lot of energy, negative energy, because it's not like they were given their own tombstone and laid to rest in the traditional form. They were just thrown together in a hole and buried. I wouldn't be rested if that was me.
I think a lot of ghosts remain for diverse reasons, some for more benevolent reasons, others, like the boy that got crushed in the bridge, for the agony that they might have encountered and endured. And there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of suffering, and I think it's within the atmosphere here.
Even as the million-dollar apartments rise above the old town, experts believe that the ghosts of the past will continue to be uncovered in the Griff.
It's a land of gentrification. You got all these really expensive apartment blocks which are going up on old factory sites, on old land that has seen a lot of tragedy. So the new residents, the young generation of young professionals that are living here nowadays, report a lot of ghosts and spirits and sightings of paranormal activity around these parts. They're digging up the past and now finding all that old history and all the old secrets of the Griffintown.